Yo, who that? Welcome in, New Orleans Saints fans, except for DJ Twigger. He just a massive hater. Instead of blessing me in my hot girl off season, he out here talking trash before the show starts. Who that to you? Welcome in, everybody, coming into the Who Dat Confessional show tonight, where we're going to talk about drama. The drama llama been dropped. My man, Michael Thomas, going off on the New Orleans Saints. We'll talk about it. I want to get y'all's opinion. Right, wrong, good, ugly, etc. We going to talk about it. Also, DJ says, "Deuce, you ain't shit." This friendly chat, so you won't curse. Well, I will. You know why? Because it's my mother show. Damn, I bleeped it. Who that to you? Welcome in, DJ Twigger, Rainy, Nick 504, Nolan Carter, NTR Uprising, Mr. Don himself. Good to see a man put a Mr. in front of his name. He's asking, not asking. He demanding respect. Good to see you in the house early on. Shane O'Mac, Randall, Giovanni Martinez, which my man can't decide if he wants to be Italian or Latin. You need to figure it out, man. Latin America or Italian America. Pick one. You can't have both sides of the ocean. Good to see everybody coming in. Who dat to you? God bless. And we'll cover the New Orleans Saints getting a couple of their well-known names heading on over to Denver. Real big surprise there. And we'll talk about the Michael Thomas drama. The offensive coordinator, wow, words are hard. Offensive coordinator search, it's ongoing. A couple names have kind of pulled out. Johnson from the Texans, he said that he is staying. And Ben Johnson, so two Johnsons, staying with Detroit, but I didn't really think that was actually going to happen anyway. So we'll wait and see how things actually pan out. And then obviously we have the Super Bowl upcoming. I'm very curious to know what y'all think about the teams in the Super Bowl. We've got the Swifty Bowl upcoming. I admit, I really wish the the Lions could have pulled it off because it was so close. And even though I didn't think they'd win, they did a fantastic job, in my opinion. I actually liked Campbell being aggressive. Y'all can judge it for what it is. I like the style. May have cost them this time, sure, but I think that's the reason why they're there and why I think that they can get back there. But, man, how awesome for us white people who are always struggling in today's society, how much we are downtrodden and all the difficulties we have to give through. If we would have had Eminem and Taylor Swift at the Super Bowl, would have been fantastic for my people. But alas, it's not to be. So all of us will just have to weep into our mayo containers as we watch the Super Bowl between the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. So who dat to you? Welcome in. Love every single one of you. If you can't smile and you can't laugh in the offseason, then I don't know how you're going to handle being a Saints fan for the next few years. Nola says, who dat? Who's MT's new team next year? I'm just going to go ahead and keep it 100. Would not be shocked if Denver, who has picked up Pete Carmichael and came and poached the New Orleans Saints college scouting director, Cody Rager, would be surprised if Michael Thomas also heads to Detroit. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen like for sure. However, I mean Denver. I said Detroit, but we were just talking about it. However, I want to talk about who is on that roster for Denver. And is there a split end that they can really rely on? And I'll be honest, I don't think that there is. That isn't me trying to sound like a hater, but like Courtland Sutton, I think is a good player, right? Courtland Sutton is the same type of guy, and he's been a Pro Bowl player. But Courtland Sutton had a great year this year, touchdown-wise, but honestly, he's not been a super stud. I do think there's room for both him and a Michael Thomas on the team. And then Jerry Jeudy that's one of the most up-and-down wide receivers in the NFL. Like, he will flash amazing plays and ability, and then he'll flash absolutely nothing. So it's kind of wild. But realistically, if I was Michael Thomas, I would be trying to go and replace, Marquez Valdes-Scantling or something over in Kansas City, right? Like Kansas City, a team that just had over 30 drop passes and is going to the Super Bowl, even with all of those problems. I'll be honest, man, I'd be trying to hitch my wagon veteran minimum to hook up with that team, but I do think that you're going to see him get picked up. I'd be surprised, but I will say this. I don't expect him to be putting up crazy numbers, but I do think that he could go be a contributor for a contender. The only thing that might hurt him, and I'm just being honest, this offseason, the talking, right? The talking. Now, I'll be real. I like Michael Thomas. I like his passion. I'm not just saying that because he likes my post on Twitter. I like a passionate guy. In fact, one of the things that has been talked about on social media, I loved it. I'm going to repeat it. I don't remember who said it eventually, but I'm going to go ahead and take credit for it because that's what I do. I'm a colonizer. It's my thing. I found it. A lot of people want players that got that dog in them until that dog bite. And some head coaches, some front offices can handle those type of players. I don't think Dennis Allen and Mickey Loomis can handle those type of players. So it's not surprising to see a guy like Michael Thomas going off unhappy. And, whether he's right in what he said, for those that missed the context of some of his statements, he talked about how after he came to the defense of Chris Olave, that there were issues between him and Carr, between him and Dennis Allen. He called out the hypocrisy, as he basically said verbatim, between we don't blame people and then saying Chris Olave should have done something. That's just going to be something that not a lot of coaches are going to want. Let's just be real about it, okay? Can he contribute as a player? Absolutely think he can. I don't think that his time in the NFL is done. I do think his time in New Orleans is done, which to a degree that does make me sad because I do believe he's the greatest wide receiver we've ever seen, and I don't blame him for the injury that cost him years. I just don't. But at the same time, I will say this. That type of outburst / disruption / culture destroyer, I wouldn't want in my locker room. Now, if we had a better coach, if we didn't have that problem, cool. Here's the thing about guys like Michael Thomas, personality-wise. I'm just going to keep it 100. When you're winning, it's not a problem. You don't care. Just being honest. When you're winning, it doesn't matter. Winning cures all problems. You can talk your trash, run your mouth as much as you want when you're winning, and nobody bats an eye. But when you are not winning, it's a problem. And I'm not saying that it's a double standard and shouldn't be that way, but it's a problem that Michael Thomas is being Michael Thomas when this team is not being successful. Now, he's the best receiver this team has ever seen in terms of like what a receiver has done in a single season or even like a 3 or 4 year span. But it's clear now that it's over, and we'll see what ends up happening with him in the future. But Michael Thomas went off on the Saints, and he talks very well of most of his fellow players, but you can definitely see just in the post on social media the vitriol almost. And I'm not trying to speak for him. Y'all can go read a lot of the posts, whether they be on Twitter, Instagram, but there was a lot of it on Twitter. So it is what it is. There was a comment I made, and this is not about Rev. This is just, if you want to find it, find it. But I made a post where I broke down what he did well and what he didn't do well. And I tried to dispel the myth that like he couldn't get open, because there were analytics guys who wanted to come after Michael Thomas who were saying things like, oh, well, he's at the bottom of the league in separation. And I was like, okay, if you are using that as an argument, that's disingenuous, because he's never been a guy for separation. In 2019, where he was literally Offensive Player of the Year, there were over 80 players in the NFL who created more separation per route than Michael Thomas. So for me, it's just all about being accurate. I mean, we saw it. Y'all saw it. The dude was pulling double teams, which surprised me at different parts of the season when he was healthy. But at the same time, it's clear that individual is not mixing well with the team. So posts would come out, and there was one that said, hey, Derek Carr rarely pulled the trigger, in reference to Michael Thomas, especially after MT called him out on the A.T. Perry play. And then Michael Thomas himself would go on to respond saying, exactly, they were mad I defended my buddy Chris Olave when everyone else was scared. But remember, we don't play the blame game, y'all goofy. One of the comments that he made. So I think that when you look at a guy like Michael Thomas, I love what he's contributed to this franchise. But at the same time, I will say this, and I think a lot will agree, you don't want to keep that around. Like, if it's reached that level of frustration, that level of anger, open animosity, we don't want that. It's the same reason, by the way, that I don't want Dennis Allen, because Dennis Allen runs to the podium after beating the division rival crying about we should absolutely never, ever offend our division rivals. Same thing. I feel the same way. Like, I don't want either one of those things in my locker room right now. Now, I don't have a choice about Dennis Allen because Dennis Allen's not going to be here. I mean, technically, I don't have a choice for either because I don't have any control over the team. I wish I did, but I don't. It's not Madden, but I can go buy Madden for $60 every year to get the exact same game that came out 6 years ago, which is obviously the best thing that can ever happen. Who doesn't love that? Who doesn't love that? And a really brief positive I want to mention, because of the Super Bowl, y'all know that guys can't attend the Pro Bowl if they're in the Super Bowl. So alternates are named. Now, I don't like when disrespect gets thrown on alternates because Drew Brees was a Pro Bowl alternate twice, if I remember. Mario Davis has actually made his second Pro Bowl because of an alternate show or being an alternate in this year's Pro Bowl. So he's now made his second Pro Bowl and he has 5 straight years of All-Pro team. He was a second team All-Pro this year and he just made the Pro Bowl again at age 34. So just a real quick hand clap for Demario Davis, like a genuine, you go get him, man. Because I've said it before, man. You could be a really good player on a bad team, and it's hard to get noticed. So congrats to him. And Appreciate says, coming in, says, it's not a coincidence that MT acts like this with DA, but not with Sean Payton. I think the hidden meaning behind that is that DA doesn't hold people accountable. And while I do agree with the basic premise of what you're saying, I will add that he did do the exact same thing with Sean Payton. I'll be very clear. Michael Thomas ran his mouth multiple times with Sean Payton. But here's the difference. Sean Payton would put him in check. Sean Payton made him get off the internet for a while. There was a time where Michael Thomas went dark on social media and he wasn't around. There was times where he got suspended. All right. So I don't want to pretend like Mike is being something that he's not always been. But it goes back to that phrase that I used earlier. Everybody wants a man who's got that dog in him until the dog bites. You got to have somebody who can handle those type of people. And I don't think that New Orleans has that currently in the front office. And let's just be real. If Michael Thomas was a young, healthy 24-year-old, you probably do what Sean Payton did, pull him to the side, tell him to shut his mouth and go play. But when the guy's 30, coming off multiple injuries, and you hopefully have the future at his position in A.T. Perry, you let him walk. And I think it's clear that Michael Thomas feels some type of way about that. And that's fine for him to do that. Like, I'm not talking trash about MT because I love MT's play. I really do. Like, the reason I love MT's play is what he's doing on social media translates to the field. Now, not everybody has to like that. And if you don't, that's completely okay. I'm not going to call anybody wrong for disliking what I like in a guy. I like that because that's the same dude who'll go trash talk AJ Terrell in his face on the field. And a lot of guys won't do that. Some people prefer players to be like the Quiet Storm and Marcus Colston, who is a all-time Saints great, and that's okay. Marcus Colston's going to catch a ball, stand up, basically salute the flag, say hello to the people, hand the ball very nicely to the referee, and like just walk right back to the huddle. Nothing. Michael Thomas is going to flex in front of somebody, and Michael Thomas is going to punch his own teammate when he gets his mouth. I like that. I like it. It's okay. If you don't, that's fine. It's like you like WWE, you like the heels versus the good guys. I basically like a 1 or 2 heels on my roster. I just do. So I was okay with it. But I completely understand if somebody's not. I just think that the big thing that Michael Thomas needs to do is he needs to go to a winner. And he needs to go into a system that will keep him in check while also bringing the best out of him. And there was a time under Sean Payton that that's what they got from him. They did that well. And I think that there are opportunities for him to find that in the league still. Good teams and good coaching staffs. Kansas City. I actually would be very interested to see what would happen if he joined up with Harbaugh and Mr. Young Justin Hebert. Calling him Hebert. I know somebody's going to correct me in the comment section, but I do it for a reason. You know, if you know. Possibly going to Denver, but I'll be honest, if I was MT, I wouldn't go to Denver. I would go where an established, high-quality quarterback is, where there is a chance of winning. Even if that meant that I was wide receiver number 3, number 4, number 5. That's what I would do if I was Michael Thomas. And go to a place that can get the best out of you while also keeping you simmered down, keeping the lid on the pot, right? Don says, I don't think Peyton likes diva wide receivers. That's why he dealt Cooks. He has no tolerance for it. That's why he never drafts them high. I think there are exceptions to the rule, Don. The exceptions to the rule are when you are a dominant player, arguably the best at your position, you deal with it. Because let's be honest, one of the reasons that Brandon Cooks was dealt is because of Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas came in, became the dog and the number one immediately, and made it very clear that Brandon Cooks was number two. And you weren't going to go get those targets anymore, young buck, even though he's technically older than Michael Thomas. It is what it is, right? So if you are able to play to a certain degree, let's just be honest, there is levels to what you'll put up with based on how good somebody is, right? When Michael Thomas was player of the year, you put up with a lot. But when he's 3 years in, he's had multiple lower leg injuries, he isn't what he used to be, you don't put up with as much. So I will say this. The biggest thing that I wanted to do on Twitter was dispel the myth that Michael Thomas was bad in 2023 and he didn't contribute. He was good. He was open. He wasn't all pro. He wasn't elite, but I do believe that he would have been an 800, 900 yard receiver. And then he did do this, which I personally disagree with. He did call out Derek Carr saying a really bad football is what got him injured. Technically not wrong, but I just personally think that that's bad business. And it's not even about whether you like Derek Carr or not. It's your resume. And if you're calling out your quarterback like that, what other quarterback wants to work with you? You know what I mean? Again, I'm not besmirching his personal character. I'm just simply saying that's going to make it really tough for head coaches and quarterbacks to buy into you, right? Now, he can, and he did. He's praised Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. I think they deserve praise. I'm not second guessing that. And you can do that. But what happens when you go play with Patrick Mahomes and you only get 300 yards? Are you going to call him out, right? Like, there's something that you have to worry about that. I do think that, a guy like Michael Thomas has several different systems that he immediately fits in day one. Kansas City, he immediately fits day one. San Francisco, he immediately fits day one. I wanted to say St. Louis, but Los Angeles, he immediately fits, right? Houston, he immediately fits in terms of style of play and what systems those guys run. I don't think he's a number one receiver anymore, but I would be surprised if he's healthy if he doesn't get looks. But I am 99.9 repeating sure that the man, the myth, the legend, MT, has donned his final Saints uniform. And it sucks because he's one of the players that I've gotten to interview. I enjoy talking to him. But he's actually one that I don't have a signed jersey from. So, just like that. But then the next one, though, I want Demario Davis. Again, shout out to Demario Davis for making the Pro Bowl. He's replacing Fred Warner from the 49ers, by the way. But Demario Davis is one that I want. I want to get that jersey. I want to get that signed. But Cody wants says Michael Thomas, Kansas City's had a good fit. It is if Kansas City wants that. The thing with Kansas City is I don't think Kansas City has great wide receiver play. But at the same time, if they were going to get a new split end, you would probably go for younger. My main point is I don't see him being a number one getting 1,000 yards anymore. I could be wrong. But to be clear, last year, or this year rather, the leading receivers for Kansas City is Travis Kelce, no shock, right? And then Rashee Rice, and then basically nobody, because then it's like Justin Watson, it's MVS. Nobody else got over 500 yards. And Rashee Rice is more of a flanker style, like you would look into a Chris Olave. He's not a big split-in chain mover, but they obviously use Travis Kelce in that role. But they were missing that type of dynamic on that team. So do I think that they could fit him in if they wanted him? Absolutely. It's just would they do it, right? And look, I know that everybody has their own takes, right? And I know TJ's going to bring up my Juju Smith-Schuster take, who, by the way, still good. But I would say that Michael Thomas in 2023, before the injury, was better than MVS. But I also think that's a very low bar. I think that's a very low bar. Right? I don't think that's exactly a high bar. So, I mean, yeah. Does he fit? They also run a very similar West Coast system in terms of the base format of what they run is similar. Andy Reid is so much better than Pete Carmichael. It's ridiculous. But, yeah, that's definitely there. So, it's possible. And if I was MT, I would literally go to Kansas City. And, again, I'm not him. But the man did get a lot of money in New Orleans. right? I'm not talking trash about that. But one thing MT does not have is hardware. He does not have enough time left in his career, in my opinion, to become a Hall of Famer. The only real thing that he can do again is win a ring. And I would tell my agent, go to Kansas City, say, I'll play for vet minimum and earn as many snaps as possible. That's what I would do. But I obviously have never been in a position in my life to be able to determine a multi-million-dollar career choice or play at a high level of any sport. That's just what I would do as a random guy with a podcast who used to cover the team professionally. So there's my opinion. Mr. Don says, Breeze definitely threw guys into hits. You can't say that about quarterbacks. All the great quarterbacks are going to throw you into hits at times. Correct. And that's kind of my point. Like, you know, Mahomes, in my opinion, is hands down the best quarterback in the NFL right now. And to me, it's not close. But that doesn't mean that every pass he throws is this perfect, amazing spiral that's right where it needs to be and nobody's ever in danger. I think that there is something that when you are in the game, you don't do. Now, if Michael Thomas retires, I'll be real. If Michael Thomas announces tomorrow that he's done with the NFL, I really don't give a damn what he said the past week. I really don't. He's done. He's hung it up. Say whatever the hell you want to say. I don't get mad at, Kenny and Shaq and Charles talking the trash they do about current former players because they've hung it up. Now you're allowed to have whatever opinion you want to. But if he is still trying to play in the league, man, calling out quarterbacks and stuff and talking mad trash is not good for your prospects when you're trying to get a job as a guy who has struggled with injuries. And even though you are a good fit for several really good teams in the league, you are turning 31 years old in a month and a half, right? He turns 31 March 3rd. That's his birthday. That's what turning 31 means. It's his birthday. That man turns 31 years old in March. He'll be 31 playing in 2024. Nobody's going to give you a long-term run. So the only shot you have is hoping to hook up with a contender and have success that way. Well, you can't go around trash talking quarterbacks. But literally, if he comes out and says, I'm done, then all of his opinions, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Don says Rashee Rice is a good player. He'll be a nearly 1,000-yard receiver starting next year. Yeah, I think that probably will happen. My point, though, was a guy like Rashee Rice on Kansas City doesn't change what Michael Thomas's potential role could be. You know what I mean? Again, I'm not saying that MT is a true number one at this point in his career because I don't believe he has the health to do that anymore. But I do think that he can contribute. And if I was him, that's what I'd be trying to doing. And also probably if I was his manager, I'd be like, dude, please get off Twitter. Please get off Twitter. Like, get off Twitter so that we can get you a job and get you back in the league and get you contributing as soon as New Orleans officially cuts him, right? That's what I would do. So I love MT because of who he's always been as a personality. I personally have always loved that. And anybody that's followed the show knows that pretty consistently. Like, I've said the same thing about Terrell Owens. I've said the same thing about Ndamukong Suh. I mean, now that doesn't mean I like Ndamukong Suh literally like cleaning people's hands, but I do like that the dude doesn't see anybody on the opposing team as a friend. Like, you talk to him wrong, he wants to punch you in the throat. I said the same thing about Jensen, the center for the Bucks. I like some of those guys who are just downright evil on the football field. I just do. I like a team having a couple of those like enforcers, if you will. And sometimes your enforcer can be 6'4", 215. So, but anyway, we got that. And then we got to talk about the Broncos over here poaching. I don't care about them taking Pete Carmichael. That's not a shock. But coming after the scouting department is probably one of the few things that New Orleans had that you could be very confident in, that even if Dennis Allen's the head coach, the drafting is still good. I know there's been a recent narrative pushed by a lot of fans that the Saints suck at drafting, but I think that's pretty easy to disprove. That said, you start having this, what in my opinion is a very good, facet of this team getting dismantled slowly. You got to make sure that you can replace and still do good. So what has happened is the scouting director, the collegiate scouting director, which kind of important, kind of like big deal right now, he is going to join the Broncos. Now, he's been with New Orleans for 9 years. He is one of Sean Payton's guys. But I will go ahead and say, this is a dude that is a good part of the Sean Payton tree, right? So he's been here the past 2 years with Dennis Allen, but he was here for years prior to that and was really, really good. He was part of the overhaul to get the scouting department good again. And he's going to be getting a promotion with the Broncos where he's getting a vice president title. So it's one of the reasons they can just come and nab him. But he was good. He was an area scout. Then he became a national scout for us. And then he became the assistant scouting director in 2021, right with Sean Payton about to head out. And then he became, the director itself past couple years. He's earned that role. He worked his way up and he's really, really good. That one could end up hurting New Orleans. I'm curious to see how that actually works out and who ends up being the replacement for him. Sean Payton nabbing a couple things that, the Saints won't. And obviously this comes while they're still trying to find their offensive coordinator, where other guys are either falling out of the race or signing with other teams. Like, for example, as you can see on the screen for watching, the former Bears offensive coordinator Luke Getsy is getting a second interview with New Orleans, but that's not a guy that's been high on many people's lists. Some of the people on the list that y'all wanted, the Zach Robinsons, the Johnsons, etc., don't seem like those are going to happen unless just something extreme out of the ordinary, unexpected ends up just shaking things up. But Jared Johnson, the Texans quarterback coach, literally about an hour before we went live said, hey, staying with Houston, not going anywhere. So instead of taking a promotion offensive coordinator, which, by the way, multiple teams, not just New Orleans, were looking at him, he said, nope, staying in Houston. That's a name off the board, right? That's not the only name off the board, but that was a big one that a lot of people really liked coming into this run. So when you look at it and you look at what New Orleans is trying to do, I hope they don't end up with a name that we don't have the same level of excitement about that we've had for others. Because Nick Underhill did report that they've honed it in and they have a very specific set of names they're looking at. Now, did they release those names? No, they did not. But I would say Ronald Curry among the front runners. And I will also add this. Nick Underhill and Mike Triplett put out a video, said, who are the front runners at OC? And they listed 3 names: Jared Johnson, who's now out of it, John Gruden, and Ronald Curry. And we haven't heard anybody talk about John Gruden, including Underhill and Tripp, until that post yesterday, which scares the living hell out of me because, damn it, that sounds so much like a hint. And it scares the hell out of me. Because whether I've already been very clear, I don't want Gruden as a coordinator on this team. And I do realize that there are people who do not agree with me when it comes to his emails and the whole past he has. And there are people who defend his honor, whatever. It's not even that. Like, I'll be honest. That is a reason I don't want him as an OC, but it ain't the only reason. I'm going to tell you the other reason. He's old, washed, busted, and disgusted. If you're going to be better, you need a fresh offensive mind to come in and take this team to a level it has not been in years. And I do not think that John Gruden gets you there. I'd trust Ronald Curry over that. But it did worry me to see that name pop up out of nowhere when we're talking about Clint Kubiak, Ronald Curry, Zach Robinson. And now all of a sudden, John Gruden's name out of left field from the premier play. Look, I know people like 4-letter networks, and there are some of y'all out there who listen to WWL, etc. Nick's not paying me to say this, and I'm not doing it to get any kickbacks, and I'm not doing it because we're friends, because me and Nick Underhill don't even really talk that much. We talk we talk during the season about football, and that's it. I don't even talk to the man about his dog and his wife. So all that said, NOLA Football is the most connected set for covering the New Orleans Saints right now. They are. They took Triplett from ESPN. You already had Underhill. All the main sources that Jeff Duncan had left are currently in Denver. His main source was Peyton. And you just got a bunch of rants on WWL, but not really much insider. So for that name to come out of that system is a little bit worrisome. To me, anyway. We'll see how that ends up developing, but I really have been adamant that I want them to go in the direction of the young, take a risk, up-and-coming type of coordinator, even if it's a little bit of an unknown, and we'll see. Now, here's the full list of who has been interviewed/hired. So they interviewed Jared Johnson twice. That's been canceled. Like, he's not going anywhere. Luke Getsy, who I just mentioned, was a former Bears OC. He's gotten twice. Greg Lewis, Clint Kubiak, Brian Greasy. Clint Kubiak and Brian Greasy, both from the San Francisco side of things. Ronald Curry, Mike Sullivan, Brian Johnson. And then Zach Robinson, who has now been hired by the Falcons. Shane Waldron, who got hired by the Bears. And Dan Pitcher, who got hired by the Bengals. So of who's remaining that we know they have interviewed, Sullivan, Ronald Curry, Greasy, Kubiak, obviously Brian Greasy and Clint Kubiak are still on a Super Bowl team, so they're not going to be flying to New Orleans for an in-person interview until after that. Greg Lewis, Luke Getsy, that's your current list of what we know of. About half the names they've interviewed are gone. We don't know of a confirmed Gruden interview, but again, for Underhill and Triplett to put that on the list is worrisome. So there are still, in my opinion, premier names on that list because there are premier names who are currently going to try to win a Super Bowl. And San Francisco has two of those names. You miss out on those. To me, the only other person that I am here for, Ronald Curry. Ronald Curry. So, Ronald Curry. And that would be, I'll be okay with that because I do believe that Carr improved as the season went on. I believe that the receiver group improved, the passing game as a whole improved as the season went on, and I believe Ronald Curry was a big part of that. So I would be okay with that, even though I've said he's not my first choice. He's like choice number 3, right? My first two choices were probably Clint Kubiak and Zach Robinson. Robinson obviously is out of it. Kubiak's a maybe. I would take Ronald Curry because I do believe that he was part of the reason, or if anything, the main reason on the sidelines why the Saints offense got better at the end of the season. Now, that could be completely anecdotal. That's fine. I'm simply giving you my opinion. I would not be upset about a Ronald Curry upward mobility, whereas I would about Gruden, who Gruden has not been, in my opinion, a good offensive mind in a long time. He's not much of a step up, if a step up, from what you just had, right? People can disagree with that. That's really fine. I have no problem with that. Totally okay. But here's Gruden's numbers. And you keep in mind that you have to go all the way back to his Tampa days. But the last 10 offenses he's run. 10. I'm going to count to make sure. All right, that's 9. Sorry. 9. All right. Honestly, I can go 10. I can go all the way back to 2003 if you want to. The last 10 seasons of him being a coordinator / head coach and calling the shots, he's had one season, where they were top 10 in point scoring. 1. That's it. In 10 years. 1. That's all. Uno. Gets worse. He's only got 1 in 10 years where they were 18th or better. And he was 18th 3 times. I just don't think he's good. I don't think he's bad. I just think he's somewhere in the middle. And the last thing the New Orleans Saints needs is somewhere in the middle. New Orleans Saints has to roll the die and hope they find a shot in the dark that becomes a light in a guy like Curry, Kubiak, etc. Like, I think you know what Gruden is as an offensive coordinator. He's mid. If you had an elite defense and a head coach you believed in, maybe that could be fine. I don't. I think for the Saints to have any chance, they have to roll the dice and hope that the OC is fantastic. And I don't think Gruden does that. I think Ronald Curry has a hell of a lot better chance of doing that. And again, I think Ronald Curry is why this offense started to look like it needed to look at the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, if we're just calling things for what they are, give me Ronald Curry. And if this whole process ended up being we interviewed a dozen people and we still ended up with Ronald Curry, I'm not going to be upset. I would be upset if you're settling for experience in Gruden, who is not an elite play caller, nor has ever been. Doesn't mean that he hasn't had success as a head coach, because he has. But he's never been an elite play caller on a consistent level. Not once, with several different quarterbacks and multiple teams. Doesn't mean he's bad. Not trash talking him, saying he's a 32nd ranked guy like Pete Carmichael was. But the Saints need to roll the dice and find a stud. Like Houston did when they brought in D'Amico Ryans, who then brought in Bobby Slowick, just like Detroit did with Ben Johnson. You need to find a young up-and-coming guy who can take your offense to another level in a modern NFL. And I don't think you do that with John Gruden. I don't think John Gruden's taking you to another level in a modern NFL. That's just how I feel about it. But I would be okay with Ronald Curry. So, Rainey says, saw a post saying Carr took Saints from the 22nd offense in some metrics to 9th in the NFL. So Carr did not, it's disingenuous to say Carr did that by himself. I do think that Carr got a lot of flame early on, deservedly so, right? Deservedly so. I do think Carr had a lot of problems in the first half of the season. I also think Carr did a much better job the last part of the season, significantly better. What that metric is the New Orleans Saints last year were 22nd in points scored. This year, they were 9th offensively. Several layers to that, though, right? Like last year, it was literally broke Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, pieces of Taysom Hill. And say whatever you want about some of those guys. You love them, you can hate them, whatever. Carr playing an entire season with this offense, getting a rapport with his players, it got better, right? Now, in terms of yards and how they move the football, third down conversions, etc., the Saints weren't necessarily that much better. But they did score the ball more, and that's kind of important, and Carr helped with that. But Carr also was only what Carr is. Like, Carr did not take a step above what Carr has been historically. Like, Carr went 25 TDs, 8 interceptions. If he would have started being good earlier, he could have got closer to 30. But he literally basically was what he's been his entire career. Here's what I mean. Here's his career numbers with New Orleans. 1 year, 68% completion, which you like. 25 TDs, but that's a 4.6 TD percentage and a 1.5 interception percentage. His career, like all the way back to his rookie year, 1.9 interception percentage and a 4.4 TD percentage, right? Like his sack percentage was basically the exact same. All of his actual how he performs on the field are identical to an extent of where you want to, how deep back you want to go to what he did in Oakland/Las Vegas. So I don't think he single-handedly came in and made this team top 10. I think this team has some really good playmakers. And then they finally started to get somebody, in my opinion, was Ronald Curry, calling some different plays and making things better. And Carr was part of that. But I don't think Carr came in single-handedly changed this offense. I think Pete Carmichael having less say changed this offense, and that's why you saw a change. And why, from a Saints perspective, they were quick to move off of him. Because New Orleans usually moves slow as molasses when it comes to these changes, because that's how Mickey Loomis does. Pete Carmichael was gone pretty quick. So I think there's definitely good to go around. And again, I do think that Derek Carr deserves some of that. And just to give, let me see if I can find some of these real quick while we're talking about it. Let's see if I can find some splits from games. Let's see. Pressure rate, accuracy ratings. Like Derek Carr only had 15% passes that were rated as bad, so off target. That's pretty damn good compared to what it was in the beginning of the season. Y'all go back to our original podcast where he was in the 20-plus range. So you saw improvement as the season went on. I don't think that anybody should try to deny that. There is also a narrative from people who don't like Carr who tried to argue that he had garbage points, but I don't really think that you find that either. Like, Derek Carr didn't have garbage yards and garbage points that just kind of like inflated his numbers. He just didn't have super high numbers, but it's always about, for me, wanting people to just be honest with the conversation. Like, because if you go by his quarter-by-quarter stats, for example, you're not seeing his fourth quarter just suddenly being just all-out amazing. So, for example, he threw 8 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. He threw 7 touchdowns in the first quarter. I mean, what are we doing with that, right? Like, he threw 850 yards in the fourth quarter. He threw 1,035 in the second quarter, like throughout the entire season. Right, so like I don't think he was garbage statting it or anything. I just think he did get better as the season went along, which was good. And you hope that continues into the future. And he definitely got better when it went to the the months by months. For example, in the month of December, here's what he did. We're not counting January, but we can. In December, he threw 73% of his passes, completed 1,000 yards, 11 TDs to only 3 interceptions, and a quarterback rating of 110. If you throw in the January game, because technically we did have a game at the beginning of January, he threw 15 touchdowns to 3 interceptions in the final 6 games of the season. Those are good numbers and about 75% completion percentage. Now, sucks that you didn't get that between September and November. November particularly being really, really bad. Like, he went from being middling bad. He went from being bad to middling to bad to really good. But it wasn't like a quarter thing. It was the end of the season thing. And what I mean by bad is first 3 games of the year, 2 TDs, 2 interceptions, only throwing 65%. That's not good numbers. That said, October, he got better. October, 6 TDs, 2 interceptions, but still only throwing 64%. So we got better, but it wasn't great. November, really bad. 3 games, 2 TDs, 1 interception, only 600 yards. Like, no bueno. Then December and January hit, and they had started to figure it out. Right? So, you hope that's what you see this year. Paul says that was against NFC South teams, which were terrible, even Tampa. It was against more than just, see Paul again, like, I'm so big on context. I'm not trying to call you out specifically, but that was against a hell of a lot more teams than Tampa, right? It's not exactly fair, right? I was also against LA. That was also, and even some of his worst games. Sure, he had bad games, but he had really good games like the Indianapolis game. That is a playoff level team. I mean, you did catch Indianapolis, I guess, on a break because they didn't have Anthony Richardson, but he also played, well against several teams. I don't think it was like a competition thing because you look at the second week of the season against Carolina, which wasn't a great team this year. He didn't look good. First time against Tampa, he didn't look good. But he looked good against the second time. I think the offense figured things out. I don't think it's fair to just throw all of it on Carr, but at the same time, Carr definitely deserves getting called out for problems that he had. So it's one of those things that I said this throughout the season. I do not think that Derek Carr is an elite player. But what I do think that Derek Carr is a middle of the road quarterback who, with a very good coordinator / coach, can flash and be a top 10 guy. And if you want evidence of that, you look at what guys like Brock Purdy, I'm not trying to be mean to them, Brock Purdy and Jimmy Garoppolo are doing, literally going to the Super Bowl with Kyle Shanahan. Well, TJ, I'm giving Carr credit. Like I just said that he helped find it and did amazing in December / January. I just wish he would have helped find it earlier. I think Derek Carr got way too much grief and not enough credit. But at the same time, it's realistic expectations. I mean, if we had Kyle Shanahan, I know Derek Carr would have 30-plus TDs and 70% completion. I just do. But I still would not say that he's anywhere near Patrick Mahomes' level. But, it's like all this Brock Purdy hype, and I know national media has to do it because, it gets ratings, right? And I'm not trying to talk bad about Brock Purdy because I do think that Purdy does what he's asked to do very well. But it's exactly that. And people talking about how well he performs, all that stuff. I'm just sitting here like, yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo did the exact same thing and helped them go to the Super Bowl. And nobody's talking about Jimmy Garoppolo right now, who is with the Raiders, changing the game. Obviously, he only played 6 games with LA, but he threw 7 TDs and 9 interceptions. And if this was the 1990s, that's fantastic, I guess. But it's not. It's the 2020s, and that's terrible. Yet literally the year before, 16-4. And then the year before that, 20-12. And then go back to 2019, it was 27-13. Like, you can tell when there's an elite coach there. And New Orleans has to try to find that for themselves. And Mr. Don, and I agree with you. He says Carr is judged by what he did with the Raiders, but the Raiders are the Raiders. I don't even think Mahomes and Josh Allen would win much with them. I think in general, people underestimate the importance of coaching. People underestimate the importance of coaching. And TJ, I'm not even arguing that Brock Purdy isn't better than Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm simply saying that they are benefiting from literally a top 3 guy at that offensive coordinator / head coaching position in the NFL. They're benefiting from that. That's the only point I'm making, right? I'm not trying to trash Purdy because I do think he's playing well, but is he elite on his own? I don't think he is. I don't think you see elite traits in Brock Purdy, but he is really good. Like he's playing really well, and that's exactly what you want. All right, it's like the Jared Goffs of the world and the Kirk Cousins. Those can be good quarterbacks, but are they elite? No. But put them in the right spot, awesome. And that's so important. And so many people have to understand that, like, yes, a player can be really good or needs to be really good. But that's why I harped on the Pete Carmichael thing, because I think you've seen enough of Derek Carr through his career, even with the Raiders, to say this guy's a good quarterback. And I'm sorry, a guy that finishes 3rd in the MVP voting and has 4 Pro Bowls is not trash. That doesn't mean he's elite, but he's not trash. So for him to be doing as badly as he was to start with New Orleans, that's why my time the entire season was turning towards the offensive coordinator. Like, sure, Derek Carr's not playing elite, but I don't think he's elite. Why is it worse than it normally is? And that's why I was like, all right, it's got to be Pete. And then we started seeing the analytics come out of how Pete doesn't do this and he doesn't do that and how he ranks at the bottom of this category. And then when they started to change the offense and it opened up, whether that was Pete or not, I think it's very clear it wasn't Pete, because if it was Pete that opened up the offense in December and January, they wouldn't have fired him. But let's just assume that it wasn't. Somebody else comes in and changes it. You start seeing Derek Carr be what Derek Carr was. You can go, okay, we can work with that, right? And I think that's what you saw. I thought you saw Derek Carr being Derek Carr. And the best season I think you can describe it to, like historical Derek Carr, is go to like the 2016 season for Derek Carr, where he was 3rd in MVP voting. He threw 28 touchdowns that year, only 6 interceptions. That's a 1.1 interception percentage that year. It's the best of his career. He threw 5% of his passes for TDs, right at 4,000 yards. And that's Derek Carr. Like, he's right there at being a 30 TD quarterback. He's done it once his entire career. He's never probably going to be the 40-50 guy like a Patrick Mahomes, probably ever. But you put him with a good spot, get everything working around him, he could be good. Because if you take what you saw from the final 6 games, and again, this is us doing girl math on TikTok, so y'all can hate it or love it. We're going to talk about it anyway. But if you take those 6 games, and let's take those 6 games and math them out, if you can find a way to get a coordinator to have him play at that level for an entire season. So basically multiply the numbers by 3. Simple, 17 games. Here was 6. Basically multiply everything by 3. So he threw for 1,343 yards. Multiply it by 3. Technically, it's not a pure 3, I know, but that's right at 4,000 yards. Oh, crap. There's 2016 pop up again. All right, he threw 15 TDs over those 6 games. All right, multiply by 3. That's 45. Hard to imagine that happening, but everybody here would shit a literal brick if Derek Carr threw 45 TDs in a season. 3 interceptions, multiply that by 3. 9. Literally kind of what he's done his whole career. So the team and Derek Carr figured it out. And if you can just get somebody to have Derek Carr be that, like, just let him be him, and that way Chris Olave is the shine, and Rashid Shaheed is the shine, because those are guys who do have elite traits, then maybe things go differently. So, and to be clear, I'm not trying to say I believe he can have a great coordinator come in and he suddenly throws 40 TDs. But I do think that you could see more of December than October. And I don't know if Chad agrees. And feel free to chime in right now, right? TBM says every elite quarterback has a good and stable team, something Carr never had. Not true. There are definitely elite quarterbacks who haven't always elite. There are elite quarterbacks who made that team and were still elite and made that team stable. Drew Brees is a good example. And I grant you had a great coach there. Those teams were not good when they were going 7-9. Like, the New Orleans Saints put up historically awful teams, and he was still elite. So truly elite quarterbacks remain elite regardless of circumstance. But you are right that Derek Carr's never had a Kyle Shanahan or a McVay or an elite offensive system built around him that let him be the highest he could be potential-wise. 100% agree with that. He's never had that. Also, 98% of quarterbacks never get that because that's just a dream scenario. Who doesn't want to go just magically have Kyle Shanahan and right now be their quarterback coach / offensive coordinator? Who doesn't want that? Everybody wants that, right? Everybody wants Ben Johnson, who's helped Goff extend his career and look really good. Everybody wants that. But you know what most people end up with? Pete Carmichael. You know what most people get? Matt Patricia. That's what most people get. That's what most people get. You don't get Kyle Shanahan. So, would you draft Michael Penix? What round? First? No. 9-2 says Mahomes got lucky. The team was already set before he was even drafted. He definitely went into a great situation because I do love Patrick Mahomes. I think people sleep on how good Alex Smith was. Alex Smith is another example. And I remember this season comparing Derek Carr to Alex Smith. Alex Smith was a very good, never elite quarterback, but he never got the respect he really deserved, right? This is a guy who threw 199 touchdowns in his career. Had 2 completely missed seasons, one due to that infection that he got after having that horrible injury, just really tough to look at. Then he missed that one with a shoulder injury all the way back in like 2007 or whatever. Like, he was a good player. He was with the Pro Bowl, 4 times? He was comeback player of the year. He was a good player. He just wasn't elite. And Kansas City got an elite. That's the dream, right? That's the dream. You got to bottom out and fire everyone to get Kyle, or you just got to be willing to give somebody that level of reign. Yeah, but you are right to an extent, right? So you are right to an extent. 9-2 says you do. He has a lot of problems. Carr has not very good eyes, slow at reading the defense as the play develops. More athletic than Carr has ever been is the difference. Who's more athletic? 9-2. Who's more athletic? And Mahomes sat and learned his first year. Carr started from day one on a trash team. Yeah, but I'm not going to use that as an excuse. Like, this is not a Derek Carr truther thing because, man, look, I will never proclaim to be an amazing quarterback scout. I don't, and I've told y'all, when it came to training as a scout, quarterback was not my thing. Quarterback and safety I found to be the most difficult things for me to study versus I got really good marks when people did my offensive and defensive line, my running back scouting reports. All those seemed to get really good reviews. My wide receiver ones got pretty good ones when I sent them out to people. A couple of teams, read my reports. So one, the Saints have got a coach that's still there now who went over some of my reports with me. But I will not sit here and pretend like my quarterback reports are freaking amazing. They weren't. That said, there's nothing I see about Derek Carr that's elite. Just period. But you can still go to a Super Bowl with a quarterback who is not elite, and the past 10 years have consistently showed that. You don't have to have Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady. You can have Jimmy Garoppolo. You can have Brock Purdy. You just have to build around it. So, yeah, Eli Manning is probably the best example of an above average / good quarterback who won multiple Super Bowls, and he was never the best quarterback in the NFL, nor was he ever a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. Ever. I would argue that you probably have to find a year where he's even top 5. Maybe my view is skewed, but fun fact about Eli Manning / modern day Brett Favre. Dude led the league in interceptions 3 times. Was never an all-pro. Was a Pro Bowl selection 4 times. Only threw above 30 interceptions 3 times. 3 in like a 15-year career. But won 2 rings. And he was good enough to help carry a team. He was good enough to be built around. But he is like the best example of a mid QB who won rings and did well, right? Because there's one thing he did have. I guess if you wanted to give him like one elite trait, dude was clutch. I'll give him that. Eli Manning was clutch. Like Eli Manning, he would make some boneheaded decisions, but at the same time, he could win some football games now. Like he could drive you down the field. And he definitely has some really good playoff games. So I definitely don't want to sound like I'm trashing him, because I remember the 2007 year, that dude looked like freaking Drew Brees in the playoffs. The 2011 year, not coincidence that both of the years that they won the Super Bowl, 2011, dude looked nuts in the playoffs. Here's his stats, because I have it pulled up here. 2011, here was his stat lines. So we played 4 games, 65% completion percentage, 1,200 yards, 9 TDs to only 1 interception. That's a 0.6%. And his QB rating was 103, while taking 6% sack. That's a percent higher than what Derek Carr had this year with New Orleans. Like, that man went off in the playoffs. Yet if you look at his 2011 season stat line, it's like, oh, 29 TDs, 16 interceptions, almost 5,000 yards. How do you throw the ball 600 times and only have 29 TDs? Like, it's wild. But he turned it on when he needed to turn it on. So they've always said that Eli was the 3rd best quarterback of the Manning boys. He was the 3rd best. Still won 2 rings. So, I mean, if you could build that around in New Orleans, obviously dream perfect scenario. Yeah. Dope. Derek Carr could win a Super Bowl. And I say that because I don't believe that you have to be elite to win a Super Bowl. It sure as hell helps. Absolutely. It sure as hell helps. But you don't have to have it. And I don't see the New Orleans Saints getting it anytime soon. So you better find a way to get it without it. But let's see. You had, with the Rams, would you call Matt Stafford an elite quarterback? Personally, I would not. I think Matt Stafford is very good. And hell, I think his Super Bowl performance is a great example. I mean, dude threw 2 interceptions in the damn Super Bowl. I wouldn't call him elite, but he won a ring. Now, if you disagree, completely okay. Then the year before that would be Tom Brady. The year before that would be Patrick Mahomes, but he was going against Jimmy Garoppolo. Then the year before that was New England and LA that year. And that was Jared Goff who made it against Tom Brady. Jared Goff got you there. Just you couldn't close it out. Then the year before that would have been Philly. And that's Nick Foles. And if anybody puts Nick Foles in an elite conversation, you go ahead and remove that person from the conversation. So, et cetera, et cetera. So you definitely can do it. It's harder. You think Stafford's pretty equal to Carr? I would say that, in my opinion, Don, Stafford is better than Carr. Like, I truly believe that. I would say Stafford is better than Carr, but I still wouldn't say that he's elite. My personal opinion. Stafford's better than Carr. Why do I say Stafford's better than Carr? Because Stafford's got multiple years where he threw 40 touchdowns. And that might seem like a silly thing to just kind of hang my hat on, but he did it with 2 different teams. He has led the league in game-winning drives 3 times. And even though he has less Pro Bowls, I feel like he's a better quarterback. One thing that is a negative against him is he turns the ball over more than Derek Carr. But at the same time, he's better at driving the field. So I guess it's a pick your thing. You pick your poison there. But I think Stafford's better, but I don't think either of them are elite. So, yeah. Stafford is tougher and more clutch. I think there is, clutch is it's an intangible that's hard to measure, right? Like, how do you really measure clutch? And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, we get into these conversations, how do you really talk about that? Like, what is clutch? How do you measure clutch? Like, are we measuring clutch by game-winning drives? Because Derek Carr in 10 years has 34 game-winning drives. And in 15 years, Matthew Stafford has 44. I mean, it's just pretty comparable. Matthew Stafford has a higher TD percentage in terms of his passes that are TDs. He also has a higher interception percentage, right? And overall quarterback rating, Derek Carr is actually a point higher. He has a 92 versus Stafford's 91. But a lot of that's going to be because of the interceptions, right? Like, interceptions are going to tank your quarterback rating. Then it depends on what type of metric you like. So, for example, you might like quarterback rating. ESPN also has their QBR. I personally don't like QBR, but a lot of people out there like QBR. Matthew Stafford's QBR is much better year to year than Derek Carr's. Like, Derek Carr is a consistent QBR in the 50s. He's even had like 4 seasons where his QBR was in the 40s, which is really bad. Matthew Stafford's QBR is typically in the 60s. He's even had a couple seasons in the 70s. It just kind of depends on what you want to look at there and what you look for in a player, right? What do you look for in a player? So, One Smoke says, can't judge by comebacks, more of a whole game. Who winning big games, the way to judge. Well, that's one thing I am big on, Smoke, is there's no such thing as QB wins. That is not a real stat. That's stupid, in my opinion. QB wins is not real because a quarterback by himself cannot change the game because it takes literally all 53 people that play, suit up, plus the entire coaching staff. So I think quarterback wins is stupid. And I never use it. Game-winning drives, I can understand because you are orchestrating a singular drive at the end of a game in a high-pressure situation. I can understand measuring that. But taking 60 minutes consistently and just doing away with everybody else's contribution and giving it all to a quarterback, I've never agreed with. And that's not to, like, dismiss Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, or anybody. But, like, if we went by QB wins, guys like Dan Marino and Drew Brees are nothing compared to Peyton Manning's and Tom Brady's and even Patrick Mahomes. They're not. Hell, even especially if you do that, but a lot of quarterbacks who are great that maybe were with bad teams for many years that are just never anything. Right? I mean, John Elway, good example, because that man was with the Broncos a long freaking time. Well, the Broncos had multiple seasons where they just sucked. I don't blame John Elway for that. Right? Now, he had a lot of good years. Obviously, the Broncos were good multiple times, and John Elway won. He was in several MVP votings, but he won MVP like early in his career. I get all those things. But QB wins has always been like the dumbest argument for me, just like Super Bowl rings has been. Like, I can even understand NBA Finals rings and MVPs more than Super Bowl rings for quarterbacks. Like, if you want to say Tom Brady's the best quarterback all time, I'm cool with it until you start bringing up rings. Rings is not why he's the best quarterback of all time. How about the fact that the man could, dominate against any defense? Didn't matter if it was match 3, cover 2, Tampa 2, man up, anything. He knew how to break it down. How about the fact that he had success with multiple teams, multiple coordinators, was able to get the ball to multiple playmakers, consistently did the same thing over and over, amazing completion percentage, low turnover rates. I'm good with all those arguments, but I'm not going to sit here and do the wins thing and the ring thing because football is just a game that needs an entire team to be good, right? You just need an entire team to be good. Like, you could not take prime Tom Brady. And y'all can disagree in the chat. That's fine. You could not take a prime Tom Brady right now, put him on the Raiders, and they're a Super Bowl contender. You could not. I'm sorry. You could not put prime Tom Brady on the Panthers right now with freaking David Tepper as owner, and they're Super Bowl favorites. Sorry, you can't. But you could go take Michael Jordan, put him on any damn team in the 90s, and they're immediate NBA Finals contenders. Just like every team LeBron has gone to in his prime was an immediate contender for the finals. Couldn't do that in the NFL, even with Tom Brady. You needed stuff around him. So I got on a little rant there. I'm sorry. But that's just my opinion with QB wins. I've always hated that as a stat because it nullifies so many other great players and so many other contributions. Right? There are very few sports where a singular person can come in and change the game like that. Basketball is one of the rare sports that can happen. Once most says Carr has a comeback record, but my thing is, why is your team always down? Why are you in the position where you always have to come back? Usually that is because of defense sucking. That's usually because the defense sucks ass. That's generally the reason that you have to do game-winning drives. It's kind of like Drew Brees actually holds the record for the most blown game-winning drives, as in he has led his team to the most game-winning drives in NFL history that have been lost because the defense went and gave up the game literally right after. Even games that had 30 seconds left. Drew Brees holds the record. It's like 50-plus games. It's nuts. And that's with Drew Brees having 53 game-winning drives. It's nuts. Like, go look it up. It's crazy. Like, I'm not going to blame a quarterback, whether it's Drew, Derek Carr, Tom Brady, anybody, for a defense deciding that they don't want to play football that year. You know, it's no coincidence that good teams, those are the years, believe it or not, that you see the game-winning drives happen. Like, we talk about Drew Brees being fantastic even in the years that they sucked, because Drew Brees, for example, led the league in yardage for 3 straight years when the team went 7 of 9. But in that 3-year span, from 2014 to 2016, he only had 8 game-winning drives. By comparison, in 2018, a good team, he had 7 game-winning drives. Yeah. So when his defenses were boo-boo garbage, it didn't matter because they were going to blow it anyway. You need a good team to get a game-winning drive because you got to seal it, right? So as an offense, you got to keep your defense off the field by long drives and scoring points. But again, that's not on a quarterback. That's on an entire offense, which is why it's disingenuous to use, QB wins, but it's not disingenuous to use game-winning drives. Because you can't expect any team to constantly be scoring every drive, every game. That's why that if you look at any given year, even now, it's rare to find teams that are scoring, 600 points in a season. It's just not happening. And you look at the Saints' best seasons, like years where they're breaking records. They average 30-something points a game, but how many of those games they actually score 30 points? So, like 2018, that's the year where they scored over 500 points. I think it's the second most points they scored in a season under Sean Payton. Over 500 is really freaking hard to do, right? But look at their schedule, how many times they consistently do that. And they did it a lot. But against Cleveland, only scored 21 points. Baltimore, 24. Dallas, 10. Tampa, 28. Carolina, 12. Carolina, 14. So in that, where you literally led the league in point scoring, over 500 points, you still had 6 games where you didn't even score 30. And most of these I just rattled off, you scored like 20 or less. No NFL team, even the best NFL teams, those are teams, by the way, they went 13-3. No team can just do that end after end after end. You just can't call Carr a clutch quarterback. Why not? It shows that he is. Again, it's all about gradients, right? And we're growing long on time. But like, just because Carr's clutch doesn't make him elite. That's the thing. He's good enough to lead a team on a game-winning drive. But that doesn't, by extension, say that he's an elite quarterback. He can still be clutch, right? In the NBA, are there not clutch shooters who are not all-star level players and first-team NBA players? Sure there are. There are plenty of guys in the NBA who were clutch in those moments. But that doesn't mean that they're a first-team player. You can be clutch and still not be elite. And I feel like when we get in these conversations, and this is not just calling you out once, but I feel like this is an issue just generally speaking, is there are people who would tie one trait to a person and they have to be elite to have that trait. And I don't think that's the case, because it's also not, it's a variable, right? Because just because you're clutch doesn't mean that you're going to have success in every clutch situation. Right? Just because you're clutch doesn't mean every time you have a clutch moment, you're going to be clutch. Sometimes you're going to fail, especially if you're not elite. 92 says, Rev, most stars are clutch in the NBA. That's not what I said. What I said was, is every clutch shooter a star? No. Everybody who is clutch in the NBA is not a star. There are guys who are clutch shooters, but are not guys who are averaging 28 points a game or double-doubles and have, an O rating in like the 120s. But they can still be clutch shooters in key moments. I mean, just my thought. They're clutch role players. I guess it comes down to like, what do you want to call elite players. Because to me, Luka's elite. So I wouldn't use Luka in that. Right? But Robert Horry, Jason Terry, guys like that. I mean, hell, even Eric Gordon in a several year span rated really high in clutch analytics, like in terms of like 3-pointers in clutch situations. But Eric Gordon has never been a first, second team anything. So anyway, that was my point. I'm running long. I want to keep talking because I love talking sports, but so Smoke says average players not getting that in clutch situations, but that's not true, Smoke, because again, I guess the good and bad thing of analytics is they actually track that. And they've actually been tracking clutch shooting and 3-point or clutch 3-point shooting since 2010. And guys like, Eric Gordon will have really good numbers in that. And again, it goes down to like, what do you consider a great player? And I'm talking about guys who are stars, right? My whole argument is that you don't have to be a star to be clutch. You can just be a good player. That's my argument. That Derek Carr can just be good, but still be clutch. Here's an example. I'm going to give you one NBA example. I'm going to wrap it up. Dion Waiters. Not in the league anymore, but I remember watching him with Miami, liked him. Dude ended up playing like 6 different teams. That said, he was 58% from the 3-point line in clutch time and got a lot of those balls. Not a single year did he ever average more than 15 points in a season. Not a single year did he ever average more than 4 assists a game. The man never had like an O or a D rating that was super impressive. He was a extremely good role player who was very clutch in key moments. But he was not elite. He was not a first or a second team, all-team player. He wasn't any of those things, but he was still clutch. That's what I'm saying about quarterbacks. Quarterbacks can be clutch and still not be elite. And they can lead game-winning drives and deserve credit for it, but that doesn't make them elite. So, but anyway, we're definitely getting into the weeds, and I enjoy the conversation. Maybe we can have more of it. It is the off season. We can talk about whatever we want to. But I appreciate y'all. Who dat? God bless. Give the show a like and a love. We will be back Thursday, so we have more of this. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. See you on the Discord. And One Smoke gave me credit. He says, yeah, Waiters was kind of clutch. Nailed it! I win, bitches. Love y'all. Who dat? Bye.